Okay, so we're back quicker than I thought. The reason why is because I've seen Bad Boys Ride or Die twice. Okay, and that should tell you everything you need to know about this discussion moving forward. I loved this movie. Now, full transparency here, I'm a huge fan of the franchise. There's a little bit of bias there because I grew up on those action films. I grew up on Martin and Will and that dynamic between, like, you know, Bad Boys 1 and Bad Boys 2, which is my favorite. This one comes a close second, but I love Bad Boys 2. I think it leans into the chaos and the craziness and the Michael Bay-isms more than any of them. And I know what people say about Michael Bay. His crass humor isn't for everyone. His knack for blowing up grass or anything that exists within our physical realm of existence is not for everyone. That being said, I know what to expect when I watch a Michael Bay film. He doesn't hide. He doesn't give false promises or set up false expectations. When you go into a Michael Bay film, you know what the fuck you're getting, right? Like the Bad Boys films, the first two, which are his, The Rock, his most recent films, Six Underground, Ambulance, older films like, Pearl Harbor, Armageddon, like Pain and Gain. These films are as Michael Bay can get. And I don't think there's ever been a place in his career where he's deviated from his formula, with the exception of Pain and Gain. And even Pain and Gain is not so much he deviated from his formula, it's just it leaned more into his crass humor than his action. But there's still all of it. His crass humor, his action is there. It's still Michael Bay through and through. And I know it's not for everybody. But to me, his films are like, you know, junk food. Like really good junk food. I go in for The Island. Can't forget The Island. That's probably arguably my favorite Michael Bay film next to Bad Boys 2. And that's the one I think he tried the hardest on, you know? And with Michael Bay films, again, it's just junk food, right? You know what you're getting. If you know what you're getting, you're going to get a quality version of what you want. You know, his chase sequences, his car chases are insane. The Transformers films are just like, as Michael Bay, it's unhinged Michael Bay. I mean, it's Michael Bay at 6 years old with Transformers, except you gave him a $50,000, $30,000 camera, and he's just losing his fucking mind. He's like, oh, I remember playing with these as a kid. Now I get to do it again, but I get to show y'all while I was imagining. Like, it is Michael Bay is Michael Bay, right? So that going in knowing that about me, this discussion is going to be very much loving on this film. I know he didn't make the film. He hasn't made the last two. It's a director duo who have done a phenomenal job bringing life into a franchise that wasn't at any point dead, but it didn't need a third one. It didn't need a fourth. But you can't bring those film sensibilities of Michael Bay into a modern audience. It's just not going to work. The audience today is a little bit more sensitive and a little bit more prone to judging. So giving new life to these last two films through the specs of two really solid directors. It's been interesting to see them take all of the positive Michael Bay-isms that everyone loves, getting rid of the Michael Bay-isms everyone hates, and just in between the good Michael Bay stuff that they're replicating, they're creating new things. They're seeding in new ideas. They're seeding in a new aesthetic. They're seeding in a new frantic nature behind the filmmaking, the film work. You could tell these guys have avidly watched Michael Bay films and have, you know, plugged away at the cinematography and go like, I like that, I like this, let's keep that, let's get rid of that, let's do this. And it's just, I imagine these guys in front of a giant touch screen just like doing the Tony Stark thing, like no, yes, no, yes, yes, no, you know, like they have a really good gauge on what worked in the old films and what wouldn't work today, and they've created and molded something new around what they've kept. With this last one, if you watch the third one, I don't necessarily think you have to watch the third one because narratively it doesn't fully connect, but you have to be aware that a few new characters have carried over from the last film, and so a lot of things that happen here would have a little bit more weight if you knew obviously what came before it. I wouldn't say that to enjoy this film you have to, that enjoying this film is nowhere near fully dependent on having watched Bad Boys for Life. But that being said, this was such a fun fucking movie. Just a fun fucking film. Martin Lawrence and Will Smith still have that back and forth ad lib dynamic that works. Like it's still intact, that friendship, that genuine, like, hey, we've in and off of, on and off of the screen, we've been tight, and you feel like that carries over into just how they probably ad lib. They go, hey, let's try this, let's try that. Where other actors would probably be a little nervous to do this in front of other actors because maybe they're not good at ad libbing. These guys have have genuine chemistry, and I mean, it makes sense. They've built 3 movies around these guys, now 4. The dynamic there is still 100%. And if anyone goes to see this film for anything other than the action, it's for the camaraderie and it's the relationship. I will say that the comedy here hits a lot more than in the last film. I feel like in the last film they were kind of just trying to get into the rhythm, and some of the humor in the last film, while here is sillier, wasn't delivered as naturally as it is here. And I feel like they were just kind of like trying new things. I feel like maybe the humor gets very silly here. There's some side plots that and character elements to Marcus's character that are humorous and they're funny and they hit more than they miss. But I will say that here there's much more free flow behind the humor, and then I enjoyed it. I was definitely cackling at a few things, and I only maybe smirked at a few. Like they had me chuckle, but not outright laugh. But most of them did. There's this whole idea that Marcus is invincible because he died, and now he's very confident that he can't die because it's not his time, and that plays into how he carries himself in action sequences. Very different from the last one. He's a lot more active in the action in here, which I really, really appreciated. He felt more like he was a main character as opposed to the last one, where he kind of took a backseat to Will Smith's arc, because the last one, let's face it, was mostly Mike's story. But here he felt they had to give him something, and I felt like because they did, they genuinely made him more of a protagonist than in the last film. So I enjoyed that. I love to see Martin was a lot more expressive in this one than the last one. I just really enjoyed that. I enjoyed Will's delivery and so much. Even when he is a straight man, he's still pretty fucking funny, and that just for me is a great thing. I still think he's a humorous, I know he's been taking his career a lot more seriously now, a lot of dramatic roles and stuff like that, but I love when he does his humor shit because it just feels organic and it's funny. He has his Willisms, his see, he does a lot of and it's funny. I like him. As far as the villain here, the villain in the story, well, let's talk about the rest of the cast. The rest of the cast is carried over from the other films. You have Reggie, who you met in Bad Boys 2. You have I believe that the Marcus's daughter is the same actress, so a lot of those characters are carrying over. They did switch Marcus's wife for another actress. I don't know if there was behind the scenes drama or maybe just scheduling issues, but it doesn't really bother me. She's not a big character, but it's something to look out for if you're like a stickler for those finer details. But she did fine. The returning characters from the last film, the Ammo team, 2 of the 3 return, and they don't give them much to do, but it's nice to have them back and enhance the action that they are a part of towards the third act. I think they're a great addition to this sort of Bad Boys family. I mean, we're going very fast and furious here with bringing back old characters, and it works. I think that they add to the dynamic. It makes the film feel larger and more team oriented, which is great. And, you know, it's Bad Boys have gone from just them two to still them, but more of an ensemble thing. And now Armando, Will Smith's son, who has a standout fight sequence in here. They do pick up on that story here in a very meaningful way, and it does move forward towards a climax. So I enjoy that they still, you know, they have a thread, a common thread between this film and the last film. The villain is ass, but he's just there to, you know, set bad guys on our boys, our bad boys, and that's it. That's all he's there. But you're there for the bad boys in the action, not so much the villain. The villain has never been good in the Bad Boys movies. I mean, you know, they've been campy for the most part. You know, I remember Bad Boys 2 and Bad Boys 1. Those villains were very, very campy and very, like, you know, mob bossy gangster cliches, but they were just there to get killed. So that's, you know, and the last one, they put a little bit more because the villain was tied to Mike's history, and obviously that's where Armando's character comes in. But the main villain, the Bruja, was still kind of pretty ass. Armando was a standout because there was the complexity of him being stuck between his mom and his dad, having not known that was his dad, and it was good, it was cool. But I this is probably like the lowest common denominator of like villains in a film in this franchise period. I will say the star of this film, aside from Martin and Mike, is the action sequences. The action sequences in here take new life because of the way that the directors and cinematographer treat treat the action film, the scenes, with momentum, right? So there's in the trailers you see, like, there's a fight scene, there's a shootout that looks like a club, but it's an art museum. I thought in the trailer it was like a laser tag place. I don't know why that would be in one, but they have a shootout in a sort of glow in the dark laser art museum, and then there's a couple sequences after, when they're running away from the gangs because there's a bounty on them. Then there's another sequence later on with Reggie, who has a standout sequence where Martin and Mike aren't around, so Reggie has to protect the family. What an incredible scene for that character, and it's nice to see his arc become very important, or just see his character develop into something more solid in this narrative, you know, among other characters that overshadow. You know, it's nice to see him not as just a secondary character, is what I'm trying to say. The climax, like, all these sequences have such momentum behind the camera work. I'm sure that most of you have seen, like, the behind the scenes footage on YouTube, where it's like Will Smith is doing the first person view action sequence at the end of the film, and how they shot that with this sort of gimbal-like camera that was attached to the handle of the gun. So every time he would push forward, the camera would face the gun, and then when he would come back to reload or take cover, the camera would face him. And I there's such a genius contraption, such a good use of ingenuity and engineering in an art form where that is what makes your cinematography, that is what makes your scene. How creative can you get in a visual medium where you're just not telling a story with static shots or a bird's eye or a worm's eye view, but you're actually creating movement, and that does so much for the audience to feel like they're a part of the action, right? The immersion. And I think that these guys really understand momentum. Momentum is super important because I nowadays everything feels performative, right? So like with things like John Wick, Extraction, The Raid, everything is moving, the camera is moving. There's and it's steady cam as well. Like it's not shaking. There's stabilization in these shots that are constantly moving. So if you're going to stand in line with all these other films, you have to do something other than just place the camera behind a person who's hiding behind cover. You have to get creative. And these guys, I mean, I guess two heads are better than one, because these guys come up with some great shots, especially in the first action sequence in the gallery, the art place. There is a great scene where they're hiding behind cover, and then the villains, the antagonists, the bad guys are on the second floor across from them, and you have this shot where the drone is basically acting like a roller coaster and is just going around the room, following basically like following the movement of these characters. You're basically going behind the villains and going through their feet, watching them get shot. And just as you see them get shot, the camera keeps coastering through, and then you're now behind Mike and Marcus, and then Marcus starts running, and then the camera keeps moving. There's just such a sense of movement that I love in films, in action films. And these guys get it. They absolutely get it. The standout sequence, though, is that climax. That climax, what they do with the camera and the first-person stuff. I mean, first-person in a film isn't new, but I think this is the smoothest I've ever seen it implemented, at least in a shootout sequence, with the exception of Hardcore Henry. And even Hardcore Henry, there's some jankiness and a lot of movement. Sometimes it gets not necessarily hard to tell, but it becomes so harsh that it stops being fluid. And here there's a fluidity that I feel is elegant, and I really enjoyed it. And I mean, they didn't overdo it either. The scene isn't super long, but it's just long enough for you to appreciate it. It's just a solid film all around. Again, the humor most of the time hits. Not all is going to hit, but humor's subjective, and for the most part, when you're ad-libbing so much in an action comedy, like, it's only natural that, you know, you have some misses and some hits. But I think the dynamic, even when the jokes don't hit, you see that they're organically delivered, and these guys are really about each other's chemistry. The action is an absolute standout. The cinematography is very stylistic, and it's a very beautiful looking action film. Some would say maybe it's over stylized, and I would say in comparison to like 1 and 2, absolutely it is over stylized, but it's not distracting, and it does breathe new life into something that is now 30 years still breathing. And you know, if you want to adapt, but you want to keep the base, the soul of the film alive, but you still want to do something different, the way that you treat action sequences and the way that you treat the cinematography is really how you improve without fully disassembling what it was when it started. And I think that they have a good understanding of what Bad Boys is. I hope they make a 5th one. I'd be down to see another one for sure. I mean, I have no problem if they keep up this kind of quality of action. And I mean, it's in a time where every movie is 2.5 hours. It's wonderful to see, you know, an hour and 55-minute movie that does what it needs to well and then leaves, because I watched it a second time. So I think that's it. Yeah, it's funny because this is like my fastest video I've recorded after having already recorded one, but I was like, yeah, I've seen it twice. I'm pretty hyped about it. Let me go in and talk about it. So I think that's it. I don't know what I'll be talking about next, but whatever it is, I hope it doesn't take 3 or 4 weeks. Okay. That's it. Also, thanks to my 2 subscribers. Again, you guys are awesome. Like, I don't know who you are. There's no comments, nothing, no likes. But you know what? The fact that you thought I was worthy enough of a subscription is enough for me. So, thank you. And then until the next video, goodbye.